Yeah.
There you are. We good?
I hope so. I am apologizing on behalf of the Alliance.
Let me tell you about technology.
Look, it's
Sometimes it just doesn't work, but I will tell you this. Zoom is my favorite, only because experiences told me, that Zoom is about 99. All the others, sometimes they creaking along at 95.
Well, I'm not sure, but we are both here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you.
And I'm really glad to be here with you. I don't know how much time I have with you. I know
Let's go. We can try to go 30.
other commitments, but
yeah, this other call back.
Okay, all righty. I want to first thank you for lending your time, your expertise, and your leadership to this conversation. This summit that we're doing together is a group of Georgia organizations that are coming together to think about our strategy kind of in the moment and in the future. I'm Ashley Robinson. I'm Executive Director of Progress Georgia. We are the Progressive Communications Hub. I've worked just a little bit of background, have worked in the legislature for a number of years as chief of staff to former House Minority Leader Stacey Abrams, and then moved into the organizational space probably maybe 3 to 5 years, maybe about 4 years ago into this role. And so I'm really excited to be able to lead this conversation with you and to moderate this conversation around the moment that we're in and how we should be thinking about the future of organizations, organizational leadership, but also what it means to lead in these types of moments. So I'm going to read your bio out and then we'll kind of move from here. So if everyone in the crowd can hear me, just clap your hands. I can't hear you, but let's just give a round of applause for first that we're joined in this conversation with the amazing Marc H. Morial, who is one of the few national leaders that possesses street smarts, street savvy, boardroom savvy, is transformative president and CEO of the National Urban League, which is the nation's largest historic civil rights and urban advocacy organization. He served as the highly successful and popular mayor of New Orleans, and I'm sure most of you have watched the recent documentary on the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina on Netflix, and you've seen him there. Marc previously was a Louisiana state senator, was a lawyer in New Orleans with an active high-profile practice, and is a leading voice on the national stage in the battle for jobs, education, housing, health, voting rights, equity, entrepreneurship, all the things that we so deeply care about and advocate for. Marc is a published author. His leadership book, Gumbo Coalition, 10 leadership lessons that help you inspire, unite, and lead and achieve, has been widely acclaimed, and his column entitled To Be Equal reaches hundreds of thousands. He's the host of a weekly syndicated television show, America's Black Forum, as a graduate of Georgetown University Law Center and the University of Pennsylvania with a degree in economics and African American studies. He's been recognized as one of the 100 most influential Black Americans by Ebony Magazine, and one of the top 50 nonprofit leaders by the Nonprofit Times. So having his voice is going to be really important here in these times. And one of the most 100 most influential Black lawyers in America. And he's also been inducted into the International Civil Rights Walk of Fame here in Atlanta. Marc and his father, the late Ernest Dutch Morial, are history makers as the first African-American father-son mayors in the U.S. and were the subject of a double jeopardy question in the legendary Jeopardy television show back in the 90s, y'all. Probably and before some of y'all in this room were born. Mr. Morial brings not only a wealth of experience, but also an inspiring perspective on leadership, resilience, and the ongoing fight for civil rights in America. So y'all, can you please help me welcome Mr. Marc Morial to our conversation today? All right.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we're going to frame the moment, especially kind of where we're at now. You know, Mr. Morial, you are uniquely positioned from your time as mayor of New Orleans to now, leading the nation's foremost organization that serves the economic, educational, and civil rights of the most underserved. How would you describe the current state of our democracy now, particularly for Black and marginalized communities?
Thank you, Ashley. Let me thank you. And I want to thank Progress Georgia, all the folks who are in the room for all of the work on the ground over the last several years. And we'll talk more about the significance of that. But kudos for your leadership and kudos for the work of the coalition. We are in a state of emergency.
Yes, we are.
When it comes to American democracy, when it comes to equal opportunity, civil rights, and diversity, when it comes to economic policies that level the playing field. This is a state of emergency. And the state of emergency is occasioned by the results of the last presidential election. It didn't begin there. It has been building over many, many years. But it reached its apex with the ascension of the current occupant of the White House and the policies that he's advanced in the first 9 months of his administration, which is one, an assault on two things. Number one, an assault on the civil rights revolution that began in 1954 with the Brown versus the Board of Education decision, which set into motion a whole series from Rosa Parks and Montgomery to Little Rock, to New Orleans, to school desegregation crises, to the fight to pass a civil rights bill in 1964, a voting rights bill in 1965, and the ascension of the economic policies of the Great Society. All the way, a through line, all the way through today. The march for civil rights in this country, for America to improve its democracy by giving those who've been locked out since the beginning of American democracy an opportunity to participate fully in American democracy. That's under assault.
Mm-hmm.
Executive orders, judicial decisions, big, ugly bills across the board have assaulted that progress. That's number one. Number two, it's an assault on the role of government, a more activist government that met the human needs of the people that began with the Roosevelt New Deal. So the Roosevelt New Deal redefined the role of the national government, created programs to economically uplift communities, created social safety net programs like Social Security, the GI Bill, and the like. And while African Americans were systemically denied full participation in the New Deal programs, the New Deal programs redefined the role of government. And that redefinition was a significant part of the role of government and civil rights to enforce the civil rights law. Those two strands that have defined the 20th century America and the early 21st century America are under attack. Russell Voigt, I was going to call him Russell Doge, the OMB director, is an architect of the dismantling of the Roosevelt New Deal philosophy. The idea that, and their vision is, well, the national government should be involved in national defense, infrastructure, and not much more. Shouldn't have a role in education, shouldn't have a role in healthcare, shouldn't have a role in housing or building American cities. All of that should be left to the private sector and the states. It's an antique view of government. It's an antique view of American society. And it's a dangerous point of view because what it'll do is going to empower a class of American oligarchs to control American politics and therefore American public policy. This is why it's a state of emergency. And I like to frame things, Ashley, in a broader historical context, because sometimes when you're in the moment, you think everything is animated in the moment, not animated by history, which is why this fight, we are on the front lines of this fight, which could be an epic fight to redefine and dismantle American democracy. That's where we are. It's a state of emergency.
Thank you for framing it that way. I think that you framing this as a true state of emergency that we're in really moves me into my next question for for us as nonprofit leaders, as activists, donors that are here in our coalition, we are under attack by the federal government. And so we saw that dismantling very early. You've talked about the historical context of it and how they've been working on this over time. What are some of the most significant threats you are seeing to civic engagement? I mean, you talked about Doge, but the civic engagement and democratic participation over the next few years.
Number one, the attack on the Voting Rights Act and voter suppression. So let's go back to 2013, Shelby v. Hope, which eliminated Section 5 and the apparatus through which states with a history of discrimination in the South had to get pre-approval for voting law changes. Once that was dismantled by the Supreme Court, the serpents, the alligators, the crocodiles, the water moccasins of voter suppression and gerrymandering came out of the woodwork. Literally thousands of bills were introduced in the states to narrow access to the ballot. In many
One of the biggest in Georgia, yeah.
Black communities, students, Latino communities, targeted at communities. It was systemic, and it continues to this day. That was enabled by a right-wing leaning Supreme Court, which basically took Section 4 and 5 and said, well, we don't think they're constitutional. It was a bad decision, and it's going to go down in history like the Dred Scott and the Plessy decisions. In the long arc of history, these decisions will rightfully be criticized. And those justices that voted in favor of overturning the Voting Rights Act, they're not going to be great historic figures. Right. Because what they did is they disabled and weakened American democracy. So the threat on voting rights and its energizing of suppression as a political tool where you seek to try to make it harder for those you think who will not vote for you to vote is one of the great and material threats. Now, there's a silent partner to voter suppression. It's called voter self-suppression. The idea that in many, many communities across the nation, our communities don't turn out to vote in big numbers. They become disaffected by politics, disenchanted by politics, cynical by politics, and don't turn out to vote. Let me give you some numbers. 2008 and 2012, we know those historic elections, the election of Barack Obama. African-American voters, let's talk about African-American voters, turned out 64 to 69%, 64 to 69% of registered Black voters turned out to vote in those two historic elections. 2016 comes along, and only 59% show up. 2020, the year of George Floyd and COVID, and the turnout is at 63, 64. Fast forward to 24, the turnout's back to 59%. Mayor's race, St. Louis, earlier this year, 24, 25% turnout. We'll get an opportunity to see what the turnout's going to be in the Detroit mayor's race, the Atlanta mayor's race, the New Orleans mayor's race, and the New York mayor's race, whether people will turn out to vote. We are leaving our power on the table. Suppression is a factor, but we're leaving our power on the table. We're not recognizing our power. Now, the proponents of Project 2025, they found a champion. Their champion was Donald Trump. He knew, for whatever you think of his tactics, how to energize a base of disaffected voters on the right to turn out in his elections in historic numbers for that side of the political spectrum. So, big threat. Power comes from people in elected office who pass laws and make rules. That's where power comes from in this country. Power comes from those with money who own institutions that spend money that are the backbone of American capitalism, so to speak. Power comes from there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the third place that power comes from in American society from time to time is an appeal to Americans' moral sense of right and wrong. And the civil rights movement demonstrated, Dr. King demonstrated, others demonstrated, they built a moral movement that integration or the dismantling of segregation was consistent with the Constitution, but was also the right thing for us to do. So we're dealing with those threats. Now, the threat then becomes economic. Big ugly bill. Cut education, cut Medicaid, cut workforce, cut housing. Single in, but on the other hand, give more money to the Department of Homeland Security to stand up a police force called ICE, give many billions more to the Defense Department to participate in armed conflict all around the world. So money was shifted, and then money was shifted into tax cuts that benefited the wealthiest Americans. And I'm not talking about millions. I'm talking about the 800 to 900 billionaires. Boy, they came out big. They came out well.
Yes,
So
they did.
you had a shifting of resources from here to there through this big ugly bill. It was the biggest single redistribution of money and wealth in modern American history. Not to the least, not to the locked out, not to the left out, but to the well off and the best off.
So for a state like Georgia, where obviously in Atlanta, we're the cradle of the civil rights movement here, we have a sordid past with voter suppression and voting history, obviously from civil rights, but even to present day, SB 202 and other pieces of terrible legislation that have moved through the halls of power here. We've seen polling, we've seen studies, and members of this coalition have been thinking about and studying how power is defined, but how it's changing in our electorate now. Because there used to be a space where we felt really good about the power that we had. And we knew that voting power, especially in a state like Georgia, mattered. And I think more in Georgia than it probably has been in any other state, we had a better understanding of the voting power and the power that we have individually. But it's starting to wane a little bit. So what do you think we can start to do to get that back from our?
So we ought to step back and understand some history.
Mm-hmm.
We ought to step back and look at nations where people do not have the right to vote. We should understand what happens when you have no vote. We've become complacent. We've become, to some extent, entitled. And that's bred a sense of cynicism. So we need to understand that we may live in this moment, but we're a continuum of our ancestors, our forefathers, our foremothers, and our families. And then we need to understand that our ancestors went through the post-civil rights era, where for 15 years, blacks made progress, held public office, began to own property, and all of a sudden, there was an assault on it. Hayes-Tilden Compromise, 1883 civil rights cases, Plessy v. Ferguson, or in a 15-year period, we went from 22 blacks in the Congress to 0 because of grandfather clauses. And we have to understand, see, I don't have any patience with people say, I don't want to hear about what happened before. You don't want to hear what happens before, but we'll spend all of our time in school learning about Roman history.
Oh, yes.
We'll spend respectfully all of our time in church learning about and reading a book about people who lived 2,000 years ago. We better embrace the idea that we need to know so that we can not repeat what has occurred, because what occurred is it was such a shock to the black people of that era. The Plessy v. Ferguson case, which comes out of New Orleans, was brought by a group called the Citizens Committee. They believed wholeheartedly that they were going to win at the Supreme Court. They just read equal protection. It seemed to be quite simple. They were shocked.
Okay.
Right. And so, most importantly, in this moment in Georgia, Georgia is ground zero.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia is super important. The energy that Georgia showed in 2022 and 24 is remarkable. That has to not only continue, as it's got to double down.
Yes, it does.
It's got to be increased. It's got to get beyond Atlanta. It's got to get beyond the big 8 counties. It's got to get to Macon, Augusta. It's got to get to South Georgia. It's got to get to the rural communities. It's got to get to every single nook and cranny. And I also think that this pro-democracy movement is not just about Black people or people of color. It is a broader thing, but people have to be educated because we've been tricked into seeing people as adversaries that we really have things in common with when it comes to democracy and economic issues. So we have a lot of work to do, but let me tell you, Progress Georgia and so many of you all have created a formula of community-based organizing, activism, and agitation that I think is very, very strong. I think it's consistent with the principles of American democracy. I think it's consistent with what people did in the civil rights movement. And I want to encourage you all to just keep on keeping on.
Thank you. I have a few more questions. We have a limited time with you, but one question I want to ask before we go to questions that are from the audience is, we are in a place where obviously you say Georgia is ground zero, but momentum has waned here in the state too. So how do we kind of sustain that movement in post-election cycles when national attention fades from Georgia? And I think that will be I've got a leadership question for you that we don't have time for, but how do we, because I think we're all kind of contending with that now, trying to figure it out. We're developing our strategies. We're moving into 2026. We've got big elections coming up next year, but we've got big jobs to not only educate, but to move people to the polls. So it's cool that we're moving.
I will say this, and this is a debate. This is always a debate in organizing.
Yeah.
Oh, is it leader-led? Or do we not need leaders? Let me tell you something. We are human beings.
That's right.
We respond to people, not to theories. We need theories. We need ideology. But that's people get energized. So you need leadership that can both energize and organize. You need candidates who run for office who can inspire us. That's a challenge, in the electoral space. Like, I'm a person that spent 20 plus years of my life in and around electoral politics. You can be an elected official, helping other people get elected. I mean, now I'm in a nonpartisan, but I'm still involved in a significant personal level. I learned that candidate quality, inspiring candidates, help to give people energy to participate in American democracy. And that is the case, right? That's just real. And I think we need in the electoral space, it's not all about electoral, but we got to remember who has power.
Right.
I can't introduce a bill. You can't, but a member of the legislature can. Right? The greatest organizer still can't introduce a bill. Right? So we got to recognize it is about impacting elected officials and policymakers and bringing energy and education and pressure indeed to them. So I think we have to realize Dr. King and Malcolm X and people like Stacey Abrams and Maynard Jackson and others in Georgia, they were inspirational personalities. That's they got a person wanting to work for them, wanting to be a part. We can't dismiss. I hate people dismissing. Oh, but if you dismiss that, you don't understand the regular voter.
Mm-hmm.
You see, I had people, they supported me, and then when I go to them sometimes and say, "Can you help somebody else?" I don't feel them. They ain't doing nothing. They ain't saying nothing. I support you. I say, well, I don't want you to just support me. I want you to support the notion of participating.
Yeah, I mean, I have this conversation.
And we have to, we just got to confront it and not get into these false debates. Well, it's not about leaders and personalities. It is, but it's not just about leaders and personalities. It is about messaging and organization when it comes to getting people excited and energized so that they want to give their time and energy to work on behalf of a cause.
So I've got one question for you, and I just want to give a quick shout out to your people at the Urban League here in Atlanta. You've got Nancy Flake Johnson and John Moy, who I've had the unique pleasure and honor to be able to work with at the Capitol. So big ups to them. But we've got one question from our audience, and we might not be able to get through all of these. But one of the questions is from Renata Robinson, who is the leader of our the research director for the Georgia Alliance. And she does her and her team have done some really amazing research. You've led civil rights work across eras from mayor to national movement leader, but when the movement has felt stuck or fragmented, what practices have helped rebuild unity and forward momentum?
Restate that last part of your question. I want to make sure I got it.
What practices have helped rebuild unity and forward momentum in your experience?
When people are divided, when people
when the movement felt like we couldn't get to consensus, we were disjointed. What do you believe helped bring some unity and kind of push us toward the finish line together?
Sometimes things we don't control, a crisis, an event, a situation that required us to act can sometimes send a message to people that whatever we're quibbling over is not as important.
That's right.
Secondly, a spirit of dialogue and compromise, because sometimes we get caught in tactical and strategic differences that are distinct from objectives. You know what I'm saying? Objectives, right? And I just think that clear-headed dialogue and give and take is sometimes the antidote, unless some people who have a disruptive personality, and I love disruptors, sometimes have no interest in the resolution of conflict, because conflict is their currency, right? And I always say, okay, disrupt, but at some point,
y'all have a lane. There's a lane.
We got to go work this room and make things happen. Otherwise, all we're engaging in is performative politics.
Yes.
Right? It's like someone told me a story about some people who went to a protest at noon and they had to hurry up and go home to see themselves on TV. Right? That was their objective, right? To see themselves on TV, to be in front of the crowd, but not to be there for the long-term work. So, we have to work through, and, in our movement, we've always had generational differences. Sometimes there have been ideological differences. And I just think we have to try hard not to let that derail working together. There's a role for insiders. There's a role for outsiders. There's a role for research. There's a role for electoral politics and a role for non-electoral activism. But the two are not distinct, right? They are lanes in the same swimming pool, right?
Yeah.
With the team swimming. And that's what we have to try to, in the 60s, the forces against us, sometimes called COINTELPRO, decided that creating dissension in the Black community between younger activists and mainstream civil rights leaders was the currency of how they wanted to put the brakes on the civil rights movement. So they created dissension through all sorts of rumors, all sorts of fake news. They created dissension so that nobody trusted anybody. In international affairs, the United States, with some of its European allies, organized coups in Latin America and Africa. And their currency was to create dissension amongst the leaders. So they go find the dissenters, give them money, give them arms, create dissension, and then they would run propaganda campaigns saying the leader's now a dictator in these nascent democracies that were less than 10 years old in an effort to create. So, we got to be careful and be aware. In the 16 election, 20 election, 2024 election, there were these digital campaigns that the Russians were involved in and that many were involved in, creating dissension in the community. Don't vote for anybody because they don't have a sufficient position on criminal justice reform. Don't vote for them because they're not down with reparations. These campaigns were not coming from inside the community. They were coming from the right, and they were disguised and masked as though they were.
Mm-hmm.
Caveat emptor, we have to be aware